What's going on? It's Mike Millner, owner of Peak Optimization Performance and author of The Personality Diet. Had a great conversation with Chase. We talked about how your personality can be an important factor for determining your nutrition and training. We got into specifics about mindset, mindfulness, and what's going on when your body is under stress and how can we deal with stress, become more resilient. This was an amazing conversation. I had a lot of fun. Thank you, Chase. And you guys are about to listen to Ever Forward Radio.
3, 2, 1.
Mike, what's good, man? Welcome back to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me back. I'm excited to be on again.
It's been, what was it, 2018? I think like late 2018 after Vegas.
Yeah, that sounds about right. Man, it's really hard to believe it's been that long. It's crazy.
Yeah, back when we used to hang out in person, right?
Yeah, exactly. The good old days.
But what's going on in your world, man? Fill me in. What's Pop Life? How's Pop Life been treating you? I know from just seeing you in the Impact Collective and everybody with Jason Phillips last year, it's just a lot of growth for you in 2019, right?
Yeah, it really has been. It's definitely been a transformative year for me personally and professionally. My business has grown pretty considerably. We've been fortunate that our kind of philosophy has taken hold and people are noticing. I always felt like we had a very strong, like small little community that was very loyal, and I still have that, which is great, but I feel like that little community is starting to expand a little bit. So that's good.
What's it like kind of getting a grassroots thing going like that? You get that collective of people who just, they're all in with each other and supporting each other and moving towards, a similar mission. And you're there to kind of lead and coach, and then that becomes a bigger thing. What's it like just, from your perspective?
It's honestly amazing to see it take on a life of its own. It almost makes me like feel a little bit not needed as
it's like, we got you, Mike. We don't need you anymore.
Yeah, exactly. They're like, yeah, we're good. It's funny because people will start, even in my Facebook group, like somebody will ask a question and somebody else will jump in before I get there. And it's almost like they said the exact thing that I was going to say. And they're like, keep in mind, I'm not Mike, but here's what I think. And I'm like, yep, that was perfect. But especially through like quarantine is a great example. The community is like rallied together, and that's where it really stood out to me. And I'm super fortunate for that because there was a lot of uncertainty. I didn't know if, my business was going to take a hit, and a lot of clients were going through, obviously,
right.
Being locked down and having to work from home and having to homeschool and all this stress. And I was like, I'm not really sure what's going to happen, but it was really amazing that like the community was the glue that held it all together. And that's where I realized how fortunate I was. Sometimes you kind of reflect back and you don't realize that you did a good thing until like it's being tested. And this was, a perfect situation for that.
Yeah, man, we're all being tested right now on a lot of different things. That's for sure. That's cool to see you get some good glue in the community over there though, for sure. It sounds like.
Yeah, we definitely do. It's a cool thing. It's it's humbling and just something that, like I said, it's cool to see it take on a life of its own.
Awesome, man. Well, I know it's been a wild ride for you for the past almost a year and a half, like I said, since you were last on the show, but I'll make sure to have that first episode linked down there for everybody. And that one is where we really went into the science and the understanding of this neurotype training that you kind of stumbled across, discovered, and then fully understood and then applied for your own fitness and nutrition coaching. But real quick, man, can you walk us through what is this neurotype training and that we're going to be talking more about here?
Yeah, so when we talk about neurotyping, it's just the best way to describe it is kind of like your fitness personality or your personality type, really. A lot of people like the analogy of like your love language for fitness.
Yeah, so, I can see that. Yeah.
You know what I mean? So when we understand somebody's personality type, it gives us insight into some ways that we can optimize training and nutrition. In the last episode, I know we went pretty deep on the training side of things. I felt like there was a gap because for me personally, nutrition was always that biggest hurdle. It took me so long to finally find my way. And I often saw a lot of similar challenges in clients and just people in general. A lot of people, they have their training somewhat intact. Like, we know that movement is good. We know that we should be lifting and that sort of thing. And that message has been hammered home And I felt like the nutrition side was still, we still see a lot of this search for the one diet, right? Like there's a lot of, nutrition ideology out there, or diet dogma, or, everybody should be doing this diet or that diet, or eating in this condensed window. And trying to look at nutrition myopically like that is doing everyone a disservice, because just like with training, the personality matters, the individual matters. And so I really kind of took it upon myself to kind of simplify how do we look at the whole person and understand the nutrition principles that are going to work best for that individual, rather than trying to say like, what should everybody be doing? How can you kind of filter all the information through your own personal lens and come to a conclusion for yourself?
Yeah, in a way you brought to the table, yes, I agree that we all need to be training a certain way. It needs to be your certain way. And that's kind of like going through the neurotype processing, right?
Yeah, exactly. So, looking at somebody's personality type, that gives us insight into kind of their brain chemistry. How are they wired? Which says a lot about how they're going to be able to adhere to a certain plan. And when it all boils down to it, it doesn't matter. Like, we all know the information, right? We have more access to information than ever before. So when I say something like, oh, a calorie deficit drives weight loss, that's great. Everybody knows that as a principle, but why do 95% of people fail to sustain weight loss? There's a disconnect between knowing and doing. And when we break it all down, it's really the adherence and consistency that matters most. So if I know kind of how a person is wired, I kind of know their personality type, a little bit of insight into what makes them who they are. Now we can start to put the pieces in place where adherence and consistency becomes a little bit more effortless. The process is more enjoyable. And as you know, like, the gift is in the process. So if we can get somebody to buy into the process, then they're going to see lifelong success and stop looking at fitness as a start date and end date, and really see the big picture. So that's really where I think that the power of understanding your neurotype, understanding your personality type, it creates more self-awareness. It helps you understand your strengths and weaknesses. And it just is almost like, why certain things haven't worked for you in the past, and then you kind of know what to do about it.
I mean, I think that's a great way to sum up what it means to take any type of personality test. We were talking earlier about how some people are kind of equating this to, it's like the 5 love languages, or it's the Enneagram. There's so many different types of tests out there, personality tests, character trait tests, to just understand you better. What's it like, someone wanting to walk through the personality diet? What are they receptive to the whole concept of, I'm going to take an evaluation of me as a person, me as a being, to then apply that to how I eat? Are they pretty receptive to that? How do they walk through that?
Yeah, so typically there's like the initial skepticism,
Sure,
and then
sure.
there's kind of like the, oh my God, this is so crazy. You're like describing me to a T. And it's not anything that's like you said, there's different personality tests out there. And I think the objective is, better self-awareness. When you look at how does that improve other areas of your life, something like the 5 love languages, it's like, okay, now I understand that my partner receives love in this specific manner, and now I can accommodate. So now when we communicate, we understand that, like, maybe for me, it's gift giving, but maybe for her, it's, random acts of kindness, whatever the case may be. It's the same thing when we're going into the personality diet. When somebody takes an assessment, really it's just to create that self-awareness. So it starts with the process of understanding the way that you're wired. Why am I this way? Typically when I see somebody go through that process, that's like the first aha moment. It's like, that makes sense, because I tried XYZ diet and failed miserably, and now I know it's because of my personality type. It almost, we look at dieting and we look at the failure rate of dieting in general, and it's pretty astronomical. 95% of diets fail. Oftentimes the individual blames themselves. That was my reality for a long time. It was always, well, I'm seeing other people get results. Why aren't I getting results? And,
Sure, yeah.
and it was more internalizing it. And, when we look at it, it's typically the vehicle that was flawed. It was just the wrong vehicle for the wrong person. It had nothing to do, like, you're not a bad person because you failed to diet. So typically that first light bulb moment is, it's like, this makes sense. Now I realize why I couldn't do, keto or carb cycling or whatever it was that they tried. And then the next step is, okay, now that I understand the way that I'm wired, I understand, what that means as far as my personality type. Now, how can we apply that? And that's, when when I talked about having this like strong community that's like very loyal, it's because it opens up so much opportunity. It's very empowering to all of a sudden realize that there's nothing wrong with me, that this is who I am. And now that I have that self-awareness, I can make conscious choices to change if I need to change something that's not serving me, or to lean into one of my strengths. And that's really, I think, why people get so passionate about it, and why we've been able to kind of build that loyal tribe.
I mean, it makes sense as you're talking about, personality. We keep saying personality. I go back to when I was in my last health coaching practice, I would work out a program or talk about nutritional guidance, and I'd be like, okay, so what do you think about that? Well, I could see how that would work, but I know me, and I'm not going to do that. Or I know me, and like, that's not going to work for me. I think it's such a key point that I'm sure a lot of people have said, or at least thought, when they want to embark on this new workout program, or when they want to change their diet up. They're doing things against themselves. They're choosing to act in a way that is not incongruent with who they are as a person. Would you say that's a fair statement? So you kind of help them figure out who they are as a person to then take the best action steps in their health and fitness.
Yeah, that's very well said. It creates this, a lot of times it creates this cognitive dissonance where you're acting outside of your nature, and there's this internal conflict that's going on. And again, it's nothing wrong with the individual. It's just typically not the right fit. So to give like a real tangible example, you have a lot of people who are very structured and organized in the way that they approach their life. They love a plan. They love repetition. The reason for that is because they have higher anxiety. Right. And one of the best cures for anxiety is predictability.
Is structure.
I know what's coming. It's structure. It's organization. So for that type of person, and, we can get into like the neurotransmitters that are responsible for that. But typically for that person, they have low levels of serotonin, which is responsible for our sense of well-being. So if serotonin is low, anxiety is high. The best way for me to accommodate for that is to create structure, organization, repetition. So for that person, having a plan, a nutrition plan that is constantly changing, and it's like, all right, one day we're going to do this, then the next day we're going to do that, and then after 1 week we're going to overhaul this and do the new plan. They're going to lose their mind. They're going to be so.
We got to confuse your muscles. All right, we got to trick your muscles.
Exactly. So that person, it's going to drive their anxiety even higher. What we want to do is give them as much certainty as possible. So we're going to do something that's very repetitive, the same thing over and over again. Let them feel that comfort that, where their anxiety now is lower. So we're kind of working in alignment with who they are as a person. That's just like one tangible example that shows the difference between, I'm just going to pick a random diet protocol to follow. Well, that may not be the best approach based off of the way that you're wired.
How did you come across this for yourself? We might have talked about this in the first interview, but I'm assuming that you stumbled across this. It worked well for you. You understood your personality, achieved results in your diet or your training. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, exactly. It was definitely a very personal journey for me. I struggled with my fitness for a while. I went from being an athlete to then being 250 pounds and lost and overweight, and tried every restrictive protocol under the sun and kept rinse and repeating the same, restrict, lose weight, gain it all back, start over. I went through that process for a long time. The first kind of aha moment for me was when I started working with one of my first mentors, Christian Thibodeau, who was a writer for T Nation. And he was the first person to tell me, there's nothing wrong with you. You've just been training against your nature. You haven't been working with your personality. And I was like, okay, that kind of makes sense. Like, help me understand a little bit more. He's like, well, you crave variety. And every time that something became repetitive, you get bored and you jump to the next thing. He started breaking it down for me. And he's like, you've been a program hopper for a long time. It makes sense based on your personality type. And it was just almost like the permission of like, maybe it's not my fault. And maybe this is just, I've been kind of taking the wrong approach all along. And then I became, and such is my personality type, when I like find something interesting, I go all in on it. So I just like became obsessed with more research. I wanted to see, and I have a passion for psychology anyway. So when he started talking about the psychology side of it, that was right in my wheelhouse. And that's really where I invested a lot of time and energy. Because again, like we can learn nutrition science all day, but that doesn't really help the behavior change. That doesn't help somebody adhere. Like just saying that a deficit drives weight loss doesn't help, Mrs. Jones, who just wants to lose some weight. Like, how does she actually adhere to that and sustain it long term. And that's really where like the behavior change, the psychology, that I just went all in on that. So once I started learning about what personality types mean as far as like neurotransmitter balance and, you know, being able to create sustainable behavior change, about growth versus fixed mindset, it really just opened up a lot of doors. And then I was seeing the change in myself and was like, okay, that's great that this works for me, but let me see how it works for other people. And it was just one after the other, like people coming to me. And honestly, it wasn't so much about the physical transformations. That was great, but they were like, this improved my relationships, my quality of life, you know, how I approach parenting, like different things that was just the self-awareness piece. Like every process for growth begins with awareness, in my opinion. So that was really where I'm like, all right, you know, I'm definitely onto something, and just continue to, you know, sharpen my tool belt in understanding really the psychology side along with the physiology.
Yeah, I would love to go there a little bit more, man. I mean, for me, I can think of most people that I worked with, and we initially had, had more of a physical goal. We wanted to gain weight, lose weight, body composition change, just feel better. The people who I think were the most successful and definitely were the most adherent longest term were the ones that also kind of had that psychological flip, or that switch flipped, and kind of realizing that it's not just about the workout, it's not just about the diet, but when I realize that I am in the driver's seat, that I can choose to make these decisions that are in alignment with the life that I want, it carries over into working relationships, personal relationships, love life. I mean, all these different things. Would you agree? And, you know, can you walk us through a little bit more of the psychology component to success and adherence and transforming someone's life?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's two concepts that you're touching on that are super important. The first is the intrinsic motivation for why you're doing this. You know, when we talk about losing weight, that's an external motivation. If we talk about, you know, I want somebody to notice me, that's an external motivation. Even something like building muscle, we can turn those things internally, but we know from research that extrinsic motivators are not very reliable. They can get us to like a short-term goal. They can maybe, you know, get us starting on a plan. But when things get tough and when challenges come up and when life throws us curveballs, as it inevitably does, external motivators are not very reliable. Intrinsic motivators are what carry us through. And that's where I'm able to associate the process with how I feel internally. What is this doing for me internally, as far as, is this making me feel better? Is it providing more energy? Is it allowing me to live more vibrantly? Can I enjoy life better? Can I be more present with my family? All of these things that are very internal. That's the stuff that we can connect to, that's going to carry us through those difficult times, when it's not just seeking an external goal or external validation. And then the other concept that you're talking about is the growth mindset. And this is well documented in the literature as well, that just having a growth mindset increases your ability to sustain your fitness transformation. And there was a cool study that was done where it was the simple act of reading one single article that was very growth mindset oriented. So they had a group of people who came in with either a growth or fixed mindset, and they tested them beforehand, and they kind of, you know, said, all right, these people came in with a growth mindset, these people came in with a fixed mindset. Then they had them read one article or another. One was basically stating that their fitness is well within their control, that they can, you know, that they are in the driver's seat, so to speak. And then there was another article that was basically like, your genetics are what they are, and this was the hand you're dealt, and too bad, like you can't do anything about it. And the growth mindset group performed significantly better in achieving their fitness goals, even if they came in with a fixed mindset. So that's the cool part, is that
just by reading the difference in the article. Wow. Yeah.
So literally just reading one article that facilitates a growth mindset was powerful enough to get them to perform better throughout this. You know, I think it was a 12-week fitness transformation that they put them through. So those are the two concepts, where having a strong intrinsic motivation for what you're doing, and then being able to facilitate more of a growth mindset, exponentially increase your odds of success long term.
But let's be honest, I'm sure you've had some clients where maybe it's like this, you know, peaks and valleys, ups and downs with the growth mindset. I think it's easier said than done sometimes for some people. Also, it's easier once you get a little bit of those changes that you're after. But then when those maybe plateau, or your strength plateaus, you're not losing weight as fast as you used to, whatever the goal was, in your opinion, when you work with people and what you write about in the book, does a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset, does that kind of ebb and flow as well? Or, how can we make sure that we stay fixed on the right one?
Yeah, it's a great question, and absolutely ebbs and flows. And not only that, but we can have a growth mindset in one area of our life and have a fixed mindset in another. So I can be very growth minded when it comes to fitness, but I can be very fixed when it comes to, say, podcasting. I don't know, something that it doesn't have to have, somebody who has a growth mindset that doesn't apply to every single area of their life. But the cool part about it is that we can draw from experience. So if I am able to use the process of fitness where I have changed my body to a certain extent, and then I can facilitate that, okay, I have made changes, I have gotten stronger, and I can reflect back and say, all right, when I first started this, I could only deadlift 200 pounds, and now I can deadlift 400 pounds, and now we can apply that to other areas. So maybe I have a fixed mindset in my career, but I can pull from that experience and help, kind of that crossover effect. And to your point, when things kind of ebb and flow, and this is, kind of taking this into the more like woo-woo abstract direction, but I am a big believer in mindfulness practices, just for that point, because there's going to be times where, life is kind of getting to you and you're maybe focusing more on the negative, and you start to believe like, maybe I'm just not cut out for this. If you don't have a process for being able to create space for yourself to sit with your emotions, to process feelings, to allow this stuff to realize that the emotions are temporary, to realize that they're transient and by nature, then it's going to be an uphill battle. But if you do have some form of mindfulness practice, if you do have a way to kind of journal through some of that stuff or meditate through some of that stuff, then, and again, this is backed by research as well, this is just not my opinion, then we have more likelihood to maintain that and be able to create awareness around, okay, yes, I'm feeling this way, but there's nothing wrong with this feeling. And then we create that space between the feeling and then the conscious
of the mind and the body. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. And then we can still move forward with what we know is best serving us.
Do you talk about in the book at all, or in your coaching practice, how maybe the personality trait can help someone work through that ebb and flow mindset process? You were saying things like journaling, like meditation, like just mindfulness practices. In your opinion, are those pretty universally applicable, or does someone's personality probably going to dictate how they can best kind of handle stuff like this?
Yeah, so it's interesting. There's some personality types that, the method is going to be unique to the individual. There's some people that if I tried to get them to do a seated meditation, they'd like quit on me. They'd be like, all right, you're crazy. I'm not doing this.
Yeah.
So for that person, I would try and encourage them to do something like walking meditation. So this is like somebody who's like dopamine dominant. They literally can't sit still. For them, like quarantine is the worst thing in the world right now. They need constant stimulation. They always need to be doing multiple things. So for them, just sitting still is almost painful. But if I can get them to do something like, walking meditation, or even something as a starting point, like I'm just going to get you to walk and listen to some music. And then eventually we're going to take away the music and we're just going to get you to listen to your feet and how it feels on the pavement and that sort of thing. So definitely there's some challenges with the personality types as to the method. But at the end of the day, mindfulness is universally applicable. It's just finding the right, method for the right individual.
Would you say that personality can change over time, and therefore how they approach their health and fitness goals are going to change subsequently? Or is it just a different season, so to speak, of a certain personality?
Yeah. So what I've seen is that, with life experience and with how you were raised and learned behavior in your environment, there's going to be some changes into how that shows up. And obviously, if you're doing some like self-development and you're really working on yourself, you will notice a difference in how you approach certain things. I mean, we can all kind of think back to what maybe something that we would have handled differently at a different phase of our life.
Oh yeah, raising both my hands on that one, man.
Right.
Yeah, for sure.
Like getting into an argument or something. And now that we've, have more experience, we're like, okay, it's not worth it. And so with the personality traits, it's interesting because we have one dominant personality type. We have one dominant neurotype, and we're going to have characteristics of multiple. And like I said, your experience and what phase you're in of life, and how you were raised, all that's going to influence kind of how those different traits show up. As far as like changing your personality type, the biggest disruptor for that is stress. So under periods of chronic stress, that's when we're going to see somebody who's really operating outside of their nature. That's something that really creates more internal conflict.
Yeah, why is that? Why is that?
Yeah, because if you just think about like the hormonal and neurological implication of chronic stress, we weren't designed to handle chronic stress. We were kind of our operating system is very much well equipped for acute stress, but pretty ill equipped for chronic stress, which is why that's kind of the root of pretty much every disease in existence. It all stems from chronic stress. If you think
mean like
about
being
it,
stuck at home for months on end, like
like
all of us are right now.
Yeah, well, to tie this back into the mindset piece, a lot of stress is perceived. So, whether
Very
it's
true.
real or not, if we perceive it, it's real. The
brain makes it real. Yeah,
exactly. And so that the same kind of chemical reaction in the body happens under a perceived stress versus, a physical stress, or, however you want to qualify it, but it's all processed the same way. So if we perceive it, it's real. So if you think about from an evolutionary standpoint, really the only chronic stress that existed was famine. It was the lack of
where's my
nutrients.
next meal? Yeah.
Right. And anything else that we dealt with, it was very acute. It basically, we either overcame it or it killed us. And that was really the nature of it. So that stress response in the body is supposed to be acute and then kind of return back to homeostasis. Unfortunately, when we are in an environment now that has a lot of chronic stressors, and even from, an emotional standpoint, or, our work stress or relationships, or even just from a mindset standpoint, like we're kind of psyching ourselves out and always thinking about worst case scenarios and creating this stress response. That's when we see some stuff from a neurological standpoint, as far as neurotransmitter balance. Adrenaline is on too much, and that can become desensitized very quickly, or we deplete our dopamine, which is like that reward center of the brain. We're relying on serotonin, so that can become depleted. Then from a hormonal standpoint, we're seeing, chronic cortisol elevation and starting to see some hormonal imbalances that impact mood. So really when you're like not feeling like yourself under periods of chronic stress, that's really kind of the root of it.
I mean, right now, globally, we're all going through the same stressor to varying degrees. Some people are more affected right now by this global pandemic than others. We have different types of stressors. We have financial, we have professional, we have, I don't know if I'm going to get to see my loved ones again, a lot of varying degrees, which is directly going to turn into varying degrees of stress in the body. So knowing what you know about our personality traits and how we kind of would normally adapt to stress, what is your opinion on all of us, all these different personality traits right now in the world, having the same stressor, going through the same stressor? Is there like a blanket approach that we can go to on this personality trait lens, or are we still need to get really specific with who we are under each category?
Yeah, so it's going to be person specific, and there's some general principles that I can talk about. So the reality is that some people are just going to be better equipped to handle it than others. The person that I was talking about who has low serotonin and naturally higher anxiety, that person's struggling right now because they need predictability, and that's been taken away from them. They need certainty, and that's been taken away from them. And they already have low levels of serotonin, which, like I said, that kind of gives us that sense of well-being. And now that's being tested even further. So right. That individual is probably struggling. What I recommend for somebody like that is try to create certainty around the next 24 hours. Plan your day. You don't have control over 3 months from now, which I know it can be an anxious feeling for that individual, but you can create certainty today. What are you doing next? Where, hour by hour, and give your brain kind of that certainty that it craves. There's other individuals who have naturally very high levels of serotonin. Typically, when we talk about dopamine dominant individuals who are very extroverted, outgoing, kind of natural leaders, they typically have very high levels of serotonin. They can handle stress better. So for that person, they're struggling in the sense that they are lacking the stimulation that they need. They like to be, kind of activated. They like to do a lot of things at once. They can't really sit still. But from just an overall like handling stress standpoint, they're pretty well equipped. A lot of people who have gone through mindfulness practice are going to kind of take this opportunity to focus on, the positive, to try and find some silver lining, to not get caught up in that negative feedback loop that can exist. Because, what mindfulness teaches us is that nothing is absolute. So there's no good versus bad, that they're two sides of the same coin.
Right,
so we can look at any experience, right? No matter how traumatic it may seem, no matter how devastating it may seem, there's always going to be something positive that you can pull away from that. And they've done research on this called post-traumatic growth, which is somebody who experienced a traumatic event can look back and say, you know what, that was really difficult, and I wouldn't wish that on anybody, but it allowed me to become the person I am today. It allowed me to do X, Y, Z, and they can actually pull something away from it. So we need that contrast. Like, we need the bad to experience the good. Without two sides of that coin, it literally doesn't exist, right? So I've used this example before, but if you were the only person in the world, nobody else existed, would you be short or tall? You would have no contrast. So, you need at least one person shorter than you to say that you're tall. It's the same thing with success and failure. It's the same thing with good versus bad.
Would you be overweight or underweight? Would you be strong or weak? Would you be
exactly? Yeah, you couldn't answer any of those questions because you have no contrast. So if you look at like success and failure, it's two sides of the same coin. Success literally can't exist without failure. They have to exist together. Otherwise, we don't have that comparison. We don't know success unless we feel failure. So people who practice mindfulness will have that perspective and will be more, well equipped to deal with that. So this is, I didn't intend for this to be like a whole mindfulness plug, but
no,
it's
great,
really,
man.
there's benefits, really across the board.
Yeah, I mean, and what you're talking about, we can, tap into the physiology of the human beings here a little bit. I mean, we have these two systems built in us. We have evolved to have sympathetic and parasympathetic. We have things that help us rest and digest, fight or flight. We have things that just require a lot of acute attention and energy and, a lot of different things going on at the same time. And others where we need very little total body engagement for other processes to happen. Let's go a little bit deeper here on what I was saying. My last question, we're all experiencing the same thing right now. So we're all experiencing varying forms of stress. Can you walk us through really what is going on internally, regardless of the personality trait? What is going on physiologically for stress? We've been talking about some hormones. We've been talking about some processes. What is going on physically with stress, and what can we just do to really understand that, hey, maybe the stress that I'm feeling or that's being portrayed in my mind right now is actually just my body going through some stuff, and it's not me.
Yeah. I think, ultimately we have to break it down to our bodies are trying to keep us alive, right? We're built for survival.
That's basically it. That's basically it. We're just trying to survive.
Number one goal for our bodies is keep you alive. That's it. So when we look at that in the context of fitness, your body doesn't care if you're trying to get shredded or you're trying to, lift a bunch of weight or you're trying to get lean. Your body just cares about survival. So if you're putting yourself under periods of chronic stress, you're going to have a hard time getting the body composition that you want. Now, when we're talking about something like this, where we're in a pandemic and there's a lot of situational stress right now, the response is the same. Our bodies don't look at stress differently. It's the same survival mechanism that comes up. So we're going to see increase in cortisol. And if you really want to get specific, why does our body do this? So with an increase in cortisol's first job is to mobilize stored energy. And the reason for that is because if I'm fighting for my life, right? Think evolutionarily speaking, saber-toothed tiger, I need all hands on deck. I need all energy available to either fight this tiger or run. I don't have time for internal thinking, right? So I don't have time to think about what's this tiger going to do to me? I need all hands on deck as far as, so cortisol will mobilize stored energy to help us prepare for what's in front of us. It doesn't have to be a tiger. It can be a perceived threat oh my God, I don't know if I'm going to get my job back. You're going to still see the cortisol release mobilizing stored energy. It's also going to suppress your immune system, which is, if you think about, the immune system is a very energy demanding system to function. Well, again, if my life is on the line, I don't want resources going to the immune system. I want resources, like I said, all hands on deck. We need to survive this stressor. So again, you can kind of see why it's more of an acute thing and why chronic stress can be such an issue. And then, we have other corticosteroids that are released. And then from a neurotransmitter standpoint, we'll see something like noradrenaline, adrenaline. Those neurotransmitters are going to increase focus, alertness, again, survival, kind of increased blood flow, muscle contraction. Like if you've ever had, heard of somebody who was under a stressful situation, they like lifted a car, increased blood flow, increased muscle contraction, like your strength goes up. And that's
like
why adrenaline.
Moms who their kids are pinned in a car and they can like somehow freakishly lift a car to save their newborn child. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. All part of the survival response. And that's also why adrenaline is increased when we're training. And so we see better muscle contractions, better blood flow, better focus, better vision. So it's a pretty intense kind of chemical reaction that happens, ultimately built for survival. The issue is that we want those things to go back to normal, to back to homeostasis. And that's where you see something like adrenaline was kind of designed as like this turbo button that we have that we can kind of turn on, but it's not supposed to stay on for very long, which is why the adrenaline receptors will desensitize very quickly. It's a protective mechanism. It's not supposed to stay activated. The same thing with cortisol, although cortisol takes a longer time to happen, but we don't want that, we don't want cortisol elevated. A lot of people think of cortisol as this negative thing, like, oh, I know it's the stress hormone, so I don't want that, but cortisol is necessary.
It's a very necessary hormone.
Exactly. Yeah. It's not, again, this is not like good or bad. It's supposed to function. It has a very
just better
important
understanding
function.
What's going on in your body, so you can kind of understand these telltale signs, maybe, for sure.
Yeah, exactly. So training is another example. We want cortisol elevated so that we have resources to be able to move and lift heavy and do all these things that we want to do when we're in the gym. But after that, like you talked about the autonomic nervous system, we want to flip into parasympathetic mode, get cortisol back down, get adrenaline back down, and now return to homeostasis. And then we see issues physiologically when we don't return to homeostasis, when that stress stays chronically elevated. So if we're talking about just real like high level 30,000 foot view, we need to be focusing on ways to shift into parasympathetic mode as much as possible. And we can do that through
especially during these times. Yeah,
exactly. We can do that through sleep, through mindfulness. We can do that through, different nutrition training protocols, any sort of like restorative, recuperative practice. So there's a lot of, supplementation. There's a lot of tools that we have on the parasympathetic side that we should definitely be pursuing right now.
Yeah, and think about it. I mean, you were hitting on some key things there. I want to kind of just highlight, I think, for the listener that we'll call this like, the 7 ways that your body is overstressing that you don't even know about, or how chronic stress can really show up without you realizing it. I mean, you were talking about how stress, when cortisol hits, it suppresses, it basically calls on all energy sources for your body to just survive the moment. Now, you don't need to be in survival mode long term. We just need that for that quick burst of energy. But also what it does, it will either activate or deactivate a lot of organ system function. And you talked about how the immune system, over 70% we now know lives in your gut. So cortisol is going to not only suppress that immune system support, but also you're shutting off the ability for total digestion. You're going to lower your metabolism. What also happens under that time is you're going to probably see maybe a little bit of, I'm eating certain things, I'm training a certain way, why am I not seeing the results? Well, because stress is leading to organ system slowing down, your metabolic rate, your immune system, and also right now, we're talking about the global pandemic we've been going through. None of us really can afford a suppressed immune system right now. So this is where people might get into the slippery slope of, I'm going to take all these supplements, drink all the orange juice, take all the vitamin C, all the zinc, all these things. Well, if you're just feeding kind of a machine that has a big hole in the bottom of it, it's not really going to do any justice. So taking awareness of chronic stressor manifestations really to really better understand what's going on in your body so you can better adjust and tap into the chill mode, really, right?
Yeah, no, that was very well said. And also, you made me think of the whole survival mechanism when it comes to chronic stress and how our bodies were built to respond in times of famine. So we still see that same mechanism kick into play, which is why you'll see something like thyroid function downregulate. It's because if we don't have any nutrients coming in, well, I want to slow down that metabolic rate, because if I keep my metabolism fast, I don't have nutrients coming in, well, I'm going to starve. And so to keep us alive, we have this survival mechanism where then we see thyroid downregulation, which also is part of what happens when cortisol is chronically elevated. So it's going to interrupt the conversion of T4 to T3, and T4 is the inactive thyroid hormone, T3 is the active version. We need T4 to be converted to T3, and cortisol will disrupt that conversion. So we'll have less active T3, thyroid hormone downregulates, and that's like our metabolic thermostat. So it's like turning down the temperature because we don't have anything coming in. Now, what happens is, this is where things get really interesting. If you're still eating a decent amount of food, but you have chronic stress in your life, now you have a lot of nutrients coming in, but the survival response is still the same. So you can actually be eating enough, but see a down regulation in your thyroid hormone. And that's where somebody would be like, well, I don't understand. I'm literally eating the same. And now all of a sudden I'm gaining weight. Well, guess what? Your metabolism is slowing down because you have chronic stress. And we know that the survival response is to downregulate thyroid hormone. So now you're actually in a surplus based off of what's happening hormonally. And so that's one.
And you're probably going to hold on to fat more because probably now you're becoming insulin resistant. And that's where people struggle with, I'm eating all the right things. I'm within my training protocol, my diet protocol, but, I'm keeping, if maybe even gaining, stomach fat. That's a telltale sign really of chronic stress from insulin resistance from chronic stress, regardless of all these other variables that you quote, have perfectly carried out, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly right. So there's a lot of things when you talk about like, why is chronic stress bad for us? We could go down so many different rabbit holes. Each one of those could be like
we could do a mini series.
Yeah. So, it's just something to be aware of and be mindful of. Again, bringing it all back full circle, being mindful and then having some protocols in place that is part of your routine. So, that, let that be your anchor. If all else fails, if nothing else goes your way, at least you have, that 10 minutes of meditation in the morning. At least you have that 30-minute walk outside. You have those anchors in place that are going to help you kind of shift into that parasympathetic mode.
Yeah, man. Kind of getting towards the end here. Let's get an example. Let's go with maybe what you would consider the most common personality trait, and let's walk someone through knowing this personality trait, describe it a little bit for us, but then how can that person mitigate stress? How can we move from chronic stress to less and less and less and really kind of tap into a parasympathetic process, a coming down process that's going to be best suited for that personality trait?
Yeah, so I'll just use the example that I used most commonly throughout this episode, which is the low serotonin individual. And they need the most in that regard. Like I said, having low serotonin is kind of putting you at a disadvantage from an anxiety standpoint. And again, there's no like best personality type. That's one common misconception. People take an assessment and like, how did I do? I'm like, you are who you are. There's
I like everybody else?
yeah, exactly. Like there's pros and cons to every personality type. But if you're just someone who's struggling with anxiety, I think the first thing to do is plan your day. Having a plan will put your mind at ease, knowing that you've got the next 24 hours outlined, especially right now. Typically for this type of personality, I would have them plan out their week and have it be more forward thinking because they like to know what's coming in advance. And if something's going to change, they want to know about it. But right now we're kind of in this uncertain time. So at the very least, plan out your next 24 hours. And then, when we talk about like, what does that look like? We want to have some time where we're allowing that person to kind of let their emotions happen. So doing some sort of, meditation, some people are kind of resistant to that. So I don't necessarily start.
I think it's
everybody.
the word. I think people are just hesitant to that word. The practice, everybody loves. Once you do it, I promise you love it.
Yeah, absolutely. So some simple things would be like, all right, how am I going to start my day? Because if you're starting your day with, checking social media, you're already on the defensive. You're already letting that stress bubble continue to grow. And that's something where you're kind of, you want to set the tone. So if you could do something like meditate 10 minutes in the morning or drink some water and go for a walk. Like there's a huge benefit if you can get some natural light. I don't know, where everybody lives. So that's going to be obviously climate dependent, but if you can get some natural light in the morning, get some movement in,
walking, meditation all day, man. Yeah.
It's huge. And then, there's a lot that we can do from nutrition, but if we have the pieces in place as far as starting the day on the right foot, getting some movement in, some, walking meditation, or just some seated meditation that we start the morning with. Then when we look at, what can we do from a nutrition standpoint, food quality is important. Actually, one of the tools that we have to help combat stress is our carbs, and carbs get demonized a lot. So yes, that can be kind of a double-edged sword, because somebody hears that and they're like, oh, cool, like the donuts and cookies, I can go ham on those. And like, we have to understand like the use, like there's a time and a place for that, obviously,
Right.
but we have to understand like, food quality matters. So when it comes to like mood stability, that's one of the best assets that we have. If we're constantly eating processed foods, constantly eating high sugar foods, we're going to see a lot of chemical imbalances, so to speak. So we'll see like a big dopamine hit, which feels good in the moment, but then it drops pretty rapidly, and then we feel like crap.
Yeah.
There's a reason why you get that energy crash. So being like more intentional about the types of foods that you're eating, and we can use carbs strategically under periods of higher stress, especially somebody who might still be in like a hospital setting, or working night shifts and that sort of thing. And really like, how you structure your day, starting the day with a win, getting in some of that, the movement, the nutrition, that's really it. Like I believe everybody should be doing still some form of training if you can get some body weight stuff in, but the research on the benefits from a neurological standpoint on strength training, they just continue to compile study on top of study.
It's science. Also, it feels amazing.
It really does. So not just the endorphin release, but there's also it also improves dopamine sensitivity. It also improves your sense of well-being through the endocannabinoid system. Like there is a ton. It's a stress relief, even though it's a stressor in the moment.
It's a use stress, the positive stress.
So ton of benefits. So like that, those are really kind of like the core tenets, and sleep, can't harp on that enough. It's one that's sometimes difficult to, again, like meditation. Sometimes it's hard to get people to buy in to the sleep. They're like, yeah, I know it's important, but I'm just going to stay up and watch Netflix anyway.
Like that's going to make me feel good, and I want to feel good and not be stressed out right now. Well, you might also be doing yourself a disservice by continuing to allow, sleep to be suppressed, melatonin to be suppressed, which is going to keep cortisol running high.
Exactly. And blue lights also increase dopamine. So then we end up with dopamine desensitization, which is, again, messing with our mood. And that's sometimes why you wake up and you're not rested. You feel like crap. And so bookending your day is kind of important. The morning routine, the wind down routine, if nothing else, get those dialed in. You'll feel a lot better.
Amazing, man. Well, Mike, I want to say again, congrats on the book. I'm going to have our first interview linked down in the show notes for everybody. We really went into the fundamentals of what is neurotype training, what are the types, and how can that person, once you understand that, really adjust their eating habits and their physical activity habits to be more conducive for adherence, but also to be more conducive for that success that they have in their mind of what that looks and feels like. But with the personality diet, man, the simple solution to getting off the diet hamster wheel and finally creating lasting results. I think a big takeaway here today was understanding these kind of signs that we have these chronic stressors going on in our life and how this may be working against us regardless. Maybe we're acting in our personality type here. But universally speaking, humans, we have these same telltale signs under chronic stress. So hopefully people can pick up on these and understand them a little bit more and work around them according to their personality type. With that in mind, man, how can this help somebody live a life ever forward? Understanding the chronic stressors of life, regardless of what's going on in the world, global pandemic or not, taking inventory of stressors in my mind and my body, and then channeling them through the personality diet here. How can this really help me move forward?
Yeah, so I think the ultimate objective here is it creates that awareness, like you talked about, which gives you so much more opportunity for growth. So I think it's one of the most empowering tools when we start to understand these things about ourselves, and we know, okay, that I am this way, and I can spot these signs. That awareness is so key, and then creating conscious choice that allows me to make decisions that help me grow as a person. So I've seen that a lot, unlock a lot of potential in people that they didn't realize. And it was just that simple awareness. It was like, we don't know what we don't know. All of a sudden, once we kind of shine that flashlight on something that's been, hidden for so long, and now we're aware of it, that's where the magic starts to happen. And then I think that, really falls in line with the concept of living a life ever forward.
Couldn't agree more, man. Well said. I think stress really goes overlooked for a lot of people. And, going full circle back to what you talked about earlier with growth mindset versus fixed mindset, some people right now during this time in the world may just be accepting that, okay, I can't go to the gym. I can't have the same eating habits. I can't. And that's just going to keep feeding into the stressor. And then maybe they realize Oh, well, Mike and Chase, you just told me that, what's the point? I have all the same chronic stress as everybody right now. So I'm not going to have the change that I want. Well, if you have a growth mindset, you can take inventory of these things and realize that just as much as these things might be happening to you, you become aware of them and you can act on them as well to reverse, to improve, to do a lot of different things. So growth versus fixed mindset. I mean, stressors really can be manipulated in a big way.
Yeah, it literally puts the individual in the driver's seat.
Absolutely, man. Well, Mike, huge, man. We're going to have the book here for everybody, The Personality Diet, down in the show notes. You guys definitely want to tap that, check it out. Where can they go online right now to connect with you more?
Yeah, so the best place to pick up the book is personalitydietbook.com. The best place to connect with me is typically on Instagram. It's at coach_Mike_Millner. Also on Facebook, it's just Mike Millner. But either place, happy to connect with anybody.
Cool, man. We'll have you all down here. Appreciate you coming back on. How are you handling stress right now before we head out? How's Mike doing with the stressors right now in the world?
Yeah, so I've been trying to take it day by day as well. There's some days that are better than others, but again, I like to look at the anchors in my life that I know, if nothing else, I'm going to have these things that are going to carry me through. So even with that, some days it's a struggle. Some days it's hard to not be able to go out and see friends and not be able to go to my gym and that sort of thing. But, I still try and make sure that I've got my mindfulness practice in place. And then I've got some of those anchors in my life when it comes to just, movement and connection with people. So it goes well beyond just like the physical training and nutrition and that sort of thing. Like I make it a point to connect with people that I care about and, that sort of thing. And that's really been helpful for carrying me through this time.
Good, man. Good. Well, it's a great seeing you again. Stay safe out there. And thanks for coming back on the show.
Yeah, thanks so much.